This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week we're joined by Steve Donoghue. He is he's an important booktuber to me, and one of my probably go to him probably more frequently than anyone else when I want to get advice on classical books. How's it going today?
It's going fine. How are you?
Well, we just did the intro off screen, so I'm groggy, and like I was just saying, computer tried to kill itself this morning, but otherwise I'm doing great. And I wanted to kind of give you a more full intro, but I don't know the full extent of what you do online. Could you kind of talk about your book, the book stuff you do?
Well, as you mentioned, I have a BookTube channel that I've had for years now, and I love it, absolutely love it. I also am an editor at an online literary journal called Open Letters Review, which has been around for a few years now, and which was the successor to another online literary journal where I was the managing editor, Open Letters Monthly. And as far as online goes, that would probably be it. In the analog, in the IRL world, I also review books for a living. That's what I do. My reviews show up all over the place, all over the place, and they have for a long time. So I have a whole slate of deadlines this week, a whole slate of deadlines every week. But as far as online only, it would be those two things. Those are the two halves of it. One is an online book critic and editor, and then also a booktuber.
How did you wind up in that line of work? 'Cause I mean, you seem to work really hard at it, and you seem to be turning in book reviews all the time.
Well, yeah, I'm a professional book reviewer, a freelancer.
Well, how did you get into that then?
Well, I was a long time ago. I was writing political op-ed pieces about just the politics of the day, the weakness of the Carter administration, the absolute catastrophe of a country willingly electing an ex-screen star as president of the United States, especially an ex-screen star who didn't seem to have the whole set of marbles that came from the store. And also, I have to admit, also angry editorials about how the country, it would be insane to elect to the presidency a feckless plagiarizer known as Joe Biden. Now, an entire lifetime later, he's president of the United States and was the most decent person in the race. So live and learn, I guess. But I was doing that when the arts and entertainment editor of the paper where I was doing that suggested that I write a book review. And I had read book reviews forever. I lived for the New York Times Book Review. And I read a lot. I read a lot then, and I thought, sure, I'll give it a try, and I loved it. I never looked back.
I think you said in one of your videos you read something like 100 pages an hour or something like that. How many books do you read on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I read about an average of 120 pages an hour, and I do that for an average of 8 or 9 hours every day. So there are plenty of days where I do twice as much as that. So I get a lot done. Like, for instance, if I get 3 galleys in the mail, 3 review copies in the mail from publishers, and they are all just standard stuff, like a 220-page murder mystery set in Africa, a 220-page precocious debut novel, 220-page work of fairly light pop history about the clash of the ironclads in the American Civil War. I can do all 3 of those in that day. And I'll be annotating them as I go along. So they'll be mine. When I'm done with that day, those 3 books will be mine. They won't be just that I flew through them. It'll be that they're mine, and they're well on the way to becoming something that I know well enough to review. And I just keep doing that. I do that over and I don't do anything else. That's the point what I meant by professional book reviewer, is that I'm not doing this as a side gig from teaching or a Yaddo fellowship or anything like that. I don't have a coding job during the day. That's all I do. That's how I get all that time to do it.
Well, love what you do. If there were ever a skill that you love to do and just did it full time, there's that. But it's amazing to me. I mean, I didn't develop that youthful desire to read, so I kind of had to learn it late in my life. So I'm only just now getting to the point where I can pour through books relatively fast. And I mean, I'm working on a review of a Beowulf for one of the websites I write for, and I read I think 60 pages on Sunday, and I hear that and I'm just like, oh man, those are weak numbers.
Well, that's not fair. Most people's numbers are weak compared to mine, even other book critics that I know. But what Beowulf?
I've read Heaney, I've read Tolkien, and this is the what's his name? I think it's like the Lizeo version from like 2000. I have to find it and remember the name, but it's very good so far. He keeps a lot of the flow of the poem very well done. It's engaging in ways that some of the other ones I've read haven't been. So, which ones have you read?
Did you like the movie?
In a perverse
stop-action animation movie with Angelina Jolie as Grendel's mother and Anthony Hopkins as King Hrothgar.
Setting aside the awful CGI animation, I almost liked it as like a satire on Beowulf, because I know Neil Gaiman wrote it, so it's there. You can kind of tell what he's doing with it, where he's trying to make this like story about, well, how do we subvert Beowulf and tell a story about the secret origins of male power over the millennia and the cycles of violence? I'm like, it's interesting, but the animation doesn't know service, and I'd prefer to have a straight up normal adaptation of Beowulf as opposed to a complex postmodern deconstruction on it. But I'll always take interesting over not interesting. So.
Did you see John McTiernan's adaptation of Michael Crichton's The 13th Warrior?
I haven't. That's one of the, I think that's one of
Warrior with Antonio Banderas.
I've seen a lot of McTiernan's movies. I haven't seen that one.
That also is a kind of through the looking glass adaptation of a kind of version of Beowulf, a version of Beowulf that might have happened.
Okay.
Possibly have happened in real life. Cannot recommend the movie strongly enough, especially if you're digging into the world and sensibilities of Beowulf. I can't recommend the movie. I have no idea which of the 50 streaming services you'd find it on, but it's worth your time. You'll remember it if you watch it.
Every once in a while, I see like these weird like BBC TV adaptations of Beowulf just sitting around, and I'm almost intrigued enough to try to jump into it, but I'm like, there's a 50-50 shot this is completely unwatchable. And I know there's like some weird like sci-fi Beowulf movie from the 90s too that I think I got 5 minutes into it and I just gave up on it. But speaking of Beowulf,
What will you do this for?
I'm sorry?
Why will you do this? You say you're reading Beowulf for your podcast?
No, it's for a website I write for. I'm a classics guy, so I would read it for fun just so I could have the chance to read it again. But I've been doing a classic series for the website I write for called Geeks Under Grace. My first one was the Iliad, which I turned in last month, and then this month is going to be Beowulf, and then the next month after that's going to be Paradise Lost, and I've got a couple smaller ones I'm doing in between them, like Fahrenheit 451, That Hideous Strength, a couple just small ones to kind of fill time between the big ones. Because the big ones I kind of need to do like a month and a half of.
The same thing for the Iliad?
Huh?
Was your approach the same with the Iliad, reading many translations?
Surely no, I read the.
You have the time.
I just read the deluxe Penguin translation. I'm forgetting who did that, but which I really like that one. But Beowulf's a little easier because it's only about 100 pages, so you can read 2 or 3 translations concurrently or subsequently, and it's not that hard. I wouldn't have the time to do like 5 translations of the Iliad. Good grief! I just had to rely on your talks about Homer just to kind of get a sense of what the other translations were even like, because there's no way I'm going to be able to read all of them.
Yeah, we're coming up on it. I read the Iliad every year in June, so we're coming up on it.
Really? Is that your tradition?
Yeah, I read the Iliad every June and the Odyssey every August.
That's awesome.
Summers are all bracketed by Homer.
I think the only...
It'll be a while.
No, that's that's a challenge to me because I'm still learning how to get into the consistent reading thing on that scale. But good grief, that's good. I would definitely want to revisit the Iliad multiple times because it's great. But it's a mountain the first time you read it. But speaking of Beowulf,
I never get to the bottom.
Well, yeah, there's infinite depths to it. But speaking of Beowulf, you mentioned one of your blogs last year that you got a copy of the New Verse translation. Did you ever follow up on that, or?
I did. Yeah, that's Janice Hadley. I think, is that her name?
Yeah.
There were two new Beowulfs last year that I know of, and I got one of them that I opened on camera, and I read it and I reviewed it, and it was full of poetic invention. It was certainly full of passion and fire. It was not really workable as a translation. So I don't know what you would do. I don't know what you would do about that. We're seeing more and more translations like that, not just of Beowulf, but of anything. We're seeing translations that are trying to, I'll try to use gentle language here. They're trying to co-opt a classical text for a modern political purpose.
That's kind of what I assumed was going on there, was that it was almost more of an adaptation of Beowulf than a translation of it, where you're just you were saying you add things to it to kind of emphasize modern ideas more so than respect the text.
Right. And I know there'll be a chorus of people out there who will immediately say, well, that's what translations have always done. And I would respond to those people by telling them very politely that they're full of what makes the grass grow. I know more about what translations have always done than they do or ever will know. And that is not true at all. But it's not just translations either. It's also historical fiction that's doing more and more of that. Like the novel Circe that just came out. This is an author who wrote The Shield of Achilles. I really like her work, and I really liked large parts of Circe, except for the moralizing, except for the 21st century social media moralizing. You know, it's one thing if you're writing a historical novel in which the witch Circe turns Odysseus's men into pigs. It's another thing entirely if you're writing a historical novel in which the witch Circe reveals that all men always have been pigs. Those are completely different things. The one is a commentary on the treacherousness of magic or whatever, and the other is just someone's political point. It's just indoctrination. And it gets old really fast. It gets old really fast. If I'm reading a novel in which Circe turns Odysseus's men into pigs, and the narrative of the novel is leading me by the hand to say, can hardly tell the difference, then I'm not interested. I'm not interested in the author's crappy views on one gender at all. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay. Have you read the I forget
that translation of Beowulf had that in mind for me.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be getting a copy of. I actually reached out to the publisher and I got a review copy of it. So I'm going to be after I finish the current translation I'm doing. I'm going to read that, and I'm going to write essentially subsequent reviews of both, just so I can say, okay, here's the proper Beowulf review, and here's my my essay on the nature of adaptation and how that changes the work fundamentally.
Have you did read Tolkien?
I did read the Tolkien one over Christmas. I found it a little bit more laborious than the other ones. Have you read that one? Yeah, it's fascinating because
I don't know that I use the word laborious, but I think I probably know what you mean.
Yeah,
it's much more of a translator than the work. It's very much a performance of Tolkien's, rather than Tolkien trying to lift the curtain back on a performance of someone else.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. That's not super surprising for him, given who he is and how much of a force his personality was. Like, it's not surprising that he would put so much of himself into it. But I mean, it never got it officially released up until like 5 years ago. So I don't necessarily mind that, because obviously it was more of a personal project for him that he wasn't totally happy with. So I'm fine with it just as a. I'm fine with it as a historical
That
oddity,
happens.
but
The stronger the creative drive of the translator, the harder they're going to find to suppress that when they're translating someone else. The harder they're going to find to get out of the way. I mean, you see that in translations of the Iliad, for instance, all the time. Alexander Pope, perfect, famous example. But also Robert Graves, the author of I, Claudius, did a heavy air quotes translation of the Iliad that's all Robert Graves. Barely anything left of whoever Homer was. It was still entertaining, still really good.
I just read Monsters and the Critics, which was his Tolkien's lecture series on it, and I think he does a pretty good job defending his personal view on Beowulf, that it's primarily a medieval poem first and a work of archaeology and something from modern voices second. And have you read his lectures on it? Of course,
Yes, I have.
I shouldn't ask you have you read something, because the answer is going to be yes.
You just assume. It'll save you time if you just assume that my answer is yes.
Yeah,
There's nothing that Tolkien wrote that I haven't read, nothing that C.S. Lewis wrote that I haven't read. Just you can just assume that.
Well, there you go. It's me trying to be modest, but you've read everything, so I can't.
Well, it's all I do. It's all I do. I don't skateboard. I don't have all this tech to do a podcast. I don't do anything else. I don't have a job. I don't do anything else but read, and that's been true for a long time. So.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you. I'll reframe the question now, since I know the answer is gonna be. What is your thought on the book Grendel, the retelling of Beowulf? Because that's one of the ones I was gonna read concurrently while I read the new verse translation, so I could. Huh?
You should read it, definitely. It's an odd thing for me to. It's an odd thing for me to comment on, because you never know which book by an author fame is just going to grab. You just don't know that. You can't always tell. That author is great. I believe one of the great authors of the second half of the 20th century. And I would not list Grendel high on the list of books that give me that opinion, and yet it is the only thing he wrote that's immortal. John Gardner is taught in schools now only for that and not for anything else. Not for any other novels that he wrote, even though the other novels that he wrote are all better. And also not for his nonfiction. He wrote guides to the study of literature and to the craft of writing that ought to be immortal. They're much better to read on the subject than most of the books that people read on that subject today. But they're gone. Everything from him is gone except that one little book. And it has a lot of his genius in it. So I'm not shaking my fist at grade schools everywhere and saying you're wasting your time. I'm glad that it's on school curriculum. If you're doing any study of Beowulf, really has to have that. You really have to have that in there. It's just, whenever it comes up, I always want to tell people, well, okay, if you like this, then you might want to try the King's Indian or the Sunlight Dialogues. You might want to try, a real work of his instead of.
I assume they're all out of print at this point, but
pretty sure they are. Yeah, it's a terrible shame.
Yeah, I'm sure a judicious Google eBay search might bring some fruit to that, but
yeah, I guess we're lucky that we have eBay and the Amazon Marketplace and Bookfinder and Abe and all of that. It's lucky that we have all of those things, but. To me, I mean, when I wasn't book reviewing, I was working as a clerk in a bookstore. And to me, there'll always be a magic in being able to walk into a bookstore and find these things. That, to me, has a currency that it really shouldn't have. I recognize that in the 21st century when so much stuff is self-published and so much stuff is straight to ebook only and is never going to be in a physical brick and mortar bookstore. I realize that in the 21st century that shouldn't have that magic for me, but it still kind of does. In a way, it still kind of does. So it bothers me that you can't walk into a bookstore and find those things. But yeah, they are available.
I mean, I can completely attest to that appeal too. Like, I remember I've done a lot of traveling in the last couple of years, and I made a stop in Lafayette, Indiana, which is where Purdue is. And I had like a couple hours to burn, so I found this college bookstore, And lo and behold, the entire basement of the place was the most like loaded, like used book section I've ever seen in my life. Like 10 aisles of nothing but used books. I found copies of stuff there I've never been able to find anywhere else. Like they had the complete works of Charles Williams and Edmund Spencer and all this stuff I've just never been able to find in new stores. So I definitely think that there's something
Well, yeah,
to
those
it.
will be gold mines.
I'm sorry?
Those will be gold mines because the professors and the assistant professors and the TAs will all bring their books there to sell them. So those anything like that, a place that's situated like that is where you're going to find great stuff. People that just clear off a shelf.
Yeah, I'm looking for.
I can't complain too much. I have a pretty good used bookstore here in Boston, so it gets plenty of traffic and stuff. It keeps me well supplied in books.
I'm looking for excuses right now to go back to Indiana, so I could I need to spend another afternoon with that bookstore. But speaking on the issue of translations, I was having a conversation with one of my writing partners about translations. I thought you might be able to offer a little insight on this. She pointed out to me that there's a lot more prose translations from like 1950s and 60s than there are now, whereas nowadays there tend to be a lot more verse translations. Would you have any insight as to why that tends to be? I mean, I know back in the day they used to have people actually learn the languages of classical poems in order to understand them. And was there just some sort? Do you think that there was any sort of desire to make them more appealing when people stopped learning Latin in their education?
Are you saying? Okay, is the question ancient works that were composed in verse?
Yes, like
translated into verse 50 years ago and are now translated into poetry, or once. So you're saying, I see what you mean. So for instance, 50 years ago, Penguin Classic, if they come out with an edition of Ovid's Metamorphoses, will do it as prose.
Yes.
I think there was an explanation for that, a very specific market-driven explanation for that, and that was the explosion of the paperback, the so-called Paperback Revolution, where all of a sudden, instead of paying $2 for a book and having it be in a bookstore and having you under the watchful eye of a bookstore clerk judging you for your choices, instead the introduction of mass market paperbacks meant that they were everywhere. There were spinner racks in drugstores, there were spinner racks in restaurants, in the lobbies of hotels, on the platforms of trains and subways. Suddenly these things were everywhere. And I think publishers realized, well, okay, then we've got a massively expanded audience and poetry is going to be a tough sell. Why not just translate this into prose and see if it works as, as one publisher in the 1950s put it, see if it works as a normal book. And it did. It absolutely did. The first Penguin Classic was a prose translation of the Odyssey. So not in verse. It was a very good classicist who did it, but he did it in prose, and it sold like griddle cakes. There were bookstores where that prose translation of Homer's Odyssey sold better than the latest Agatha Christie. So it worked. That approach absolutely worked. There are two things to remember, two key elements to remember, I think, and why that has changed in the present day. Number one, books are a lot more expensive. They're a lot more expensive. There is no such thing as a cheap book anymore. And there used to be. It used to be that if you had $2 burning a hole in your pocket and went into a drugstore for gum on a cross-state car ride, you could get gum and 3 books. That is absolutely not true anymore. If you want to do that now, you will stop in, you'll pay $5 for gum and $30 for 3 books. And that makes people chary about it gives it a more exclusive feel. That if we're going to do this, then we're not going to reach an audience of 100,000 people, so we might as well put in the time and front load the energy to get a translator in verse and a new introduction and all that sort of stuff, maybe facing pages with the original on one side and the verse on the other. And the other element to remember is not one that anybody likes to remember, especially the news items that regularly lie about this subject, that regularly massage statistics to make a lie about this subject, and that is that far fewer people read. Far fewer people read now than read if this is 2021, let's say 1951. Far fewer people read now. So you are much more able to contour your latest thing to an audience that can handle verse, that thinks it can handle verse. The thing I like about those early prose translations is that they made converts of a lot of people. A lot of people found a prose Ovid or a prose Homer on one of those bookstore shelves, started reading it because they weren't intimidated by verse. Instead, they were seeing prose, they were seeing chapters and paragraphs, and fell in love with those works, and then went on to read them in verse and are so happy that they did. That approach worked not only in financial terms but in reading terms as well. I guess we're not worried about that anymore. I guess in 2021 we're not really worried about turning off a massive audience of readers, because the massive audience of readers isn't out there. They're coming through their phone instead.
I mean, I mean, there are certain books that do seem to fly. I mean, like, every time I go to Barnes & Noble, there's, like, 20 shelves of YA fiction and stuff like that. Like, I mean, I think there is a generation of young people that does read. It's just that they're reading the same kind of book over and over again, and not really,
We'll see. We'll see if studies bear that out. They are definitely reading the same kind of book over and over again, and they're definitely doing it with a lot of enthusiasm. Once upon a time, I would have said it's the kind of reading that isn't going to last outside of adolescence, because they're not reading it for the experience of reading a book. They're reading it for the experience of making new friends, of having new lunchrooms to make friends in. And that's not going to survive. Once you're in college, you're not going to care about that anymore. But I was in part wrong about that when I thought that same thing about the Harry Potter phenomenon. Harry Potter fans went on to become omnivorously hungry readers for all sorts of things. So maybe you're right. Maybe that is a good sign. That would be great if it were. But those same people, those same young adults who might be buying those books in good numbers in bookstores also literally can't live without their phone. Literally for 1 minute, they can't live without their phone. There's a booming industry of shower-proof phone cases so that you can have your phone by your hand in the shower. So I don't know. I don't know if they can do both. It seems to me that those two things are antithetical to each other. Reading is a long-form a version of subversion of the self. Submerge your identity in something else. Whereas thumbing on your phone is entirely short-term and entirely about you. It's entirely about stimulating your limbic region. So I don't know if they go together.
I mean,
maybe they do.
My primary concern with young readers is not that they're not... I mean, people that actually do, I know who do read. It's not that they don't read, it's that they don't read anything more challenging than Harry Potter. So they read Harry Potter and Tolkien when they're in high school, and then they buy like Hunger Games and all the YA stuff, and none of that stuff really challenges them beyond the surface level. It's all pure escapist fantasy. So I think they engage with literature the same way they engage with anything else. It's just that pure kind of get a quick spark of exhilaration off of it and then go back to doing what you're doing. It's not you're delving into literature to understand it. You're getting a high off of it, basically.
Well, if that's true, then those are the people who went on to make Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train into mega billion-dollar successes. The Girl on the Train is such an incredibly wretched book. A small child could look through it and say, okay, here are the 5 main things that are wrong with this. I can go on if you want. A small child could do that. And yet it made enough money to set the author up for the rest of life. So maybe those people, maybe once they graduate from, video game books as high schoolers, maybe that's the kind of stuff they read. Maybe that's that audience. But then again, Wolf Hall also sold like crazy. And so did Philip Pullman. His books that were marketed anyway in America as for YA, they also sold well, and they weren't dumb. So maybe there's hope after all. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends on your definition of whether there's hope in the long run or not. But
what about you?
I don't know.
You yourself are young.
Yeah, and I'm a weirdo who records podcasts about how much he likes the Iliad. So in IRL, do you read more than all of your friends? I would presume that's the case, but I haven't interrogated them as to how much they read. But I also run in circles where I have 5-6 friends who are absolutely voracious readers, and my writing partner we do phone calls every week where we read Parzival and Dante to each other, and we just and so I don't consider myself normal in any regard. Just that I'm willing to actually go back and read the stuff that no one else wants to read. So,
What about your use of your phone?
I mean, I have my phone on me all the time, but I also have like Kindle. So like whenever I love downloading those like whole packages of like entire reader's bibliography for $1. It's like, oh, I have the entire works of G.K. Chesterton and George MacDonald on my phone now, and I could just got
Do
10
you like
minutes.
reading on a screen?
It's okay, especially when you don't have anything else. It's not necessarily ideal. I like that feeling of holding a book, but there is something convenient to being able to flip open and be like, okay, where was I in Heretics just now? But I would always prefer a physical book, though, if I had the opportunity.
Do you remember a time before the internet?
I was born 1995, so I was I was growing up right as AOL was a thing. So I wasn't online probably extremely till about junior high school. So yeah, I do vaguely remember life before the internet, but I was also like addicted to other electronics. I mean, I was a TV addict growing up, so I didn't. That's why I didn't read that much growing up. I just had different. I had different electronic addictions as opposed to whatever ones all kids today have. It's just a different form of it. So yeah, I mean, there's always going to be there's always going to be something distracting people from being able to actually put time into this, and you only get good at reading if you actually put the effort in.
I agree. It's a muscle, like anything else. It's been a state of contention for centuries. It was a great thinker centuries ago who said that all human problems devolve from the fact that so many people find it almost impossible to sit alone in a room in silence. And that was true centuries ago when it was said, and it's still true. So,
I've always heard people say people used to read more, but I was always curious as to how much that was actually specifically related to like classics reading and how much we've collectively fallen in that regard. I mean, if people used to comfort read Homer as a prose translation, I'm curious as to. I mean, obviously they probably don't do that now that much, but it's interesting that that's always been somewhat of a problem, but it's hard to tell how much because grass always seems like it's greener.
Well, the audience has shrunk, so a popular phenomenon like that Penguin Odyssey in prose, I don't see how it would be possible today. Books can still take off like bottle rockets, but not good books, usually dumb ones. And even there, I distrust the numbers. I don't know. I don't know. I put a lot of hope in things like Wolf Hall, which was a genuine phenomenon, a serious, intelligent, challenging, fantastic historical novel. That was a genuine phenomenon also, where thousands and thousands and thousands of people bought it and read it and loved it. And we have their testimonials. We have thousands of people saying, I'd never read a historical novel before in my life, knew nothing about Tudor England at all, and loved this book. Just loved it. So there's hope. I hope there's hope.
Yeah. I always just get concerned walking through the halls at Barnes and Noble. So you got to go all the way to the back to find the good stuff. And you just know everyone's buying the stuff that's right off the front. And I'm like, that's... But yeah, you mentioned that poetry wasn't that necessarily that popular in the 50s. This is a tangential question, but I was under the impression that poetry was a lot bigger circa 60, 70 years ago than it is now. Am I wrong in that? Because I knew that back then that you actually had major poets like Iliad still alive and actually driving
I was talking about just, ordinary John Q. Public, the guy that is an insurance salesman. He works in New York City. He takes the train to Larchmont every day, and read for school, but has never read since. I wasn't talking about the literary world. The fact that books like that were able to sell so well is because they reached into a world that hadn't thought about it before, that hadn't been a target audience before. Suddenly, for chump change, literally for the change in your pocket, you could buy this thing, and why not? And that member of John Q. Public, okay, all of a sudden he has the money in his pocket to buy a book. All of a sudden the book is where he is instead of him needing to go to a bookstore. And on top of all that, well, yeah, he's thinking, in high school we had to read some poetry and it was really kind of off-putting. I felt kind of dumb. And I remember this author's name, but this is just paragraphs. This is just ordinary prose. I can read this. That was a whole untapped audience.
Was there ever a point where poetry was considered the mainstream? Because I think it was you who said like Longfellow was one of the most popular writers of his century. Was there ever a point where poetry was more as popular or more popular than prose?
Yeah. Well, for instance, the author of Beowulf was composing in a world entirely of poetry, but nothing else at all. That was the only game in town. The earliest examples of my own profession of book reviewing and book criticism are all of poetry. It was the serious literature to do, so it wasn't in John Dryden's day. I don't think many people would have thought much of trying to write book criticism of the latest play, although he did it. But most people would have turned their critical attentions to poetry. I don't know where it stands today. It's always encouraging when, an instance like Amanda Gorman at the Joe Biden inauguration recites one of her poems and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. That's really exciting. That's great. I always have hope when things like that happen that more people will become fans of poetry. Excuse me.
I'm not that familiar with the modern poetry scene. Every time I hear something nowadays, it's always kind of something moderately politically tinged, but not necessarily. I don't hear a lot of like what the actual movements of modern poetry are like.
I probably wouldn't know either. I see a lot of the politically tinged stuff that you're talking about, and it grates on me. It absolutely grates on me. If you went to an exclusive private high school, and then you went to Columbia, and then you got a job at a law firm and an original debut publishing contract from Farrar, Straus and Giroux, I really don't want to read your poetry about oppression. I really don't want to read it. And yet I am going to. So the political elements of it, by absolute carpetbaggers, absolute parvenus who just read the landscape and know what will work. I don't have much interest in reading their stuff and being lectured to by somebody who has never in their life had as little money as is the most money that I've ever had in my life. They've never even come close to the two meeting. I really don't want to be lectured about privilege from some such people, but a lot of the rest of it is also maddeningly enigmatic. It's just where the poet is just throwing random words down on a page or making allusions to private memories. So, when I was a little kid and we were taking our vacation to the beach, I remember the old crank handle of the window on the back seat. Before you could touch panels, you had to crank the window open and close. And I remember looking at that cranked handle and thinking that it looked like a well handle. And when that person gets around to writing a poem about that, instead of drawing that comparison and making a poem out of it, instead they just say, well handle in the car. You have no idea that they have no memory, no idea whatsoever. You don't have any idea what they're talking about because they're writing it just for themselves. And thanks to the Beats and the generation of poets that followed them, the people who read this kind of crap think, oh, well, if I don't understand it, that's my fault, not the poet's fault. So I'm going to read a line that says, sitting in the back seat, the well handle, bringing up a bucket of water. What on earth does that mean? I have no idea what that means. I don't know your memory of your childhood vacations. I don't know what that is. In the last 50 years, the attitude in poetry teaching has been, that's my problem. That's my fault. I'm just not open enough to it.
It's intellectual solipsism. Yay!
Yeah, where a poet will get up on stage to recite one of his poems. He will recite it in a bored monotone, even though he will admonish you that it's not to be read in a monotone. He'll recite it in a bored monotone because he's the poet, and he's really got better things to do with his time. And he wants you to know that. He wants you to know that he holds you in contempt for even being the audience here. But he wants you to buy his chapbook. he's got contempt for you, but he doesn't have contempt for your money. And he'll be 2 lines into one of his crappy poems in that monotone when his phone goes off and he takes the call and just stands there on stage talking to his friend. While everybody in the audience, I have actually seen audiences that thought that was an incredibly perceptive meta commentary on the watchability of modern poetry. They actually liked it.
It's part of the act.
Exactly. And if you can do that, if you can incorporate that in, that nothing you do is ever wrong or could be wrong, you've got it made. And the one person who's cut out of that loop is the reader. All you're left with are groupies. You're left with people who want an in-joke, who want to feel like they have a right to condescend to everyone else. And too much of modern poetry strikes me that way. But I've been reading a lot more of it in the last few years, and I've found some very good exceptions. So not all of it by any means. It's just memories like that stick in me craw.
Is that an actual like example of like I'd love to see a recording of that if that's real.
I'm sure that somebody recorded it, and I'm sure they did it worshipfully. I'm sure that somebody recorded it. Just the pure arrogance of it.
I almost respect that. I mean, nowadays, I talk about this all the time with my friends. Like nowadays, there's an inverse relationship between charlatanism and the lack of success, where it just seems like the more pandery and simple you get, the more success you seem to get. And I'm always joking with my fellow writers, like I should just sell out. I should just like write porn or something and just like it's like I just want money. It doesn't matter because I'll make more money doing that than I will like writing my authentic like classical style poetry or some sort of epic prose or something that means something. It's like just show for what people want. You'll make a lot more money that way.
I think the key sensibility that people tap into is one that was heightened and sharpened into pathological levels by social media, and that is FOMO. If you are an artist of some kind and you create a sense that if you don't act like you get what's going on, you're left out, then people will act like they get what's going on, even though they don't, because nothing is going on. They'll experience fear of missing out, and that will override everything. Still, I could be wrong. I don't want to gripe. I don't want to spend the whole time griping.
Yeah, I mean, I could very easily turn this into us just complaining about modern literature for another hour. But what are you working on right now specifically?
Well, I just finished my preliminary blocking out of my review of the new biography of Philip Roth. I'll be doing that this week. Hope to file it by the end of this week. Blake Bailey's big new biography of Philip Roth that's been in the works for years. I have a long and contentious relationship with Philip Roth, so it's going to be a struggle for me, a very good, very interesting kind of struggle, to write that review in a way that doesn't just have me climbing up on my hobby horse or a soapbox or whatever. I want to give the book its due, and I also want to give legitimate fans of Roth's novels their due. So that's going to be fun to do. That's a big thing I'm doing. And then there's a new Shakespeare book coming out where the author puts forward an idea of how it is that the man from Stratford could have written all the plays that he did, when the little that we know about the man from Stratford, as the anti-Shakespeareans call him, would lead you to think that he didn't have anything like the experience or knowledge to write the plays that we read under the name Shakespeare, which has led 4 centuries of people to saying someone else must have written them and used his name as a pseudonym. And there's a new book coming out by Michael Blanding called North by Shakespeare, in which he takes a twist on that. He's still wondering how the man from Stratford could write those plays, but he has a very interesting take on it. It's in his idea, it's not that someone else wrote them. It's that someone else provided all the stuff in them that we don't think the man from Stratford could provide. We don't know that he ever went to school. We know that he was involved in the acting world in London, but we don't know that he ever wrote a word other than 2 dramatic poems that he wrote for patronage. But plays? His name is on a bunch of them, but his name is also on a bunch of plays that he didn't write. And so it's a neat take on the Shakespearean authorship question, and I try never to miss an opportunity to write about the Shakespearean authorship question because it's so interesting. It gets people thinking about history in ways that I absolutely love. I wish more people realized how much fun history is. It gets them thinking about history. Okay, here's a historical fact that I've been taught since I was a kid. How do we know that's true? How do we know that's true? You get the Shakespearean authorship controversy like nothing else except maybe the JFK assassination. Gets people who have no contact with history, who had no previous interest in it. It gets them digging around in primary sources. It gets them learning what primary sources are and how they affect each other and why people rely on some and not others. I just love that aspect of it. So I try never to miss an opportunity to write about it. And those are, if I haven't bored you cross-eyed, those are the two things that are on
No. It's I'm generally annoyed by the authorship question just because it seems so not necessarily pedantic, but people just seem to want it to be true. So they just kind of I've never particularly had any sort of reason to doubt doubt Shakespeare's authorship. So seeing people go super hard into that, it tends to be more annoying to me than anything else. But that's
I love it. I love it.
It's an interesting take.
A historian comes along. It doesn't have to be Shakespeare or JFK or Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. No matter what the subject is, if a historian comes along and says, "Okay, here's the thing that you have always thought about X," I say it's not true at all. And I'm not just going to shift the burden of proof and tell you to prove that it is. I'm going to prove to you that it's not. I will read that all day long, no matter what it is. That doesn't annoy me at all. If a historian comes along, a legitimate person, not someone who's making a crazy theory, but someone who comes along and says, I think there is legitimate reason for doubt here, and here's a new theory of mine. Whew, I'll take that any day of the week. And the fact that it's the one author that everybody knows just makes it all the more universal. If it's a Shakespeare book, nobody's going to care. If somebody comes out with a book contesting the authorship of a few canti by Ludovico Ariosto, no one's going to care. No one's going to publish it. And even if they did, no one's going to care. But everyone in my audience will know who Shakespeare is. So they'll all be interested in that. So with that review, I only have 800 words. So it'll be a question of, you could literally write a whole book on the subject. I have to lay out what the problem is, and then lay out some of the solutions, and then lay out the author's solution. I have to do all that before I can even talk about the book. Same thing is true with, there's a new book coming out in April on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I have 800 words. And I want to talk about the book, but I can't assume that my readers know about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I have to tell them about it. And that's a chunk. How much room do I give to that out of 800 words? Maybe a bit more about book reviewing trivia than you want to hear.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to break into writing full time at some point, so it's interesting hearing from someone who actually does this full time.
With these things, with the Shakespearean authorship controversy and with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the problem is me. The problem is that I know both those subjects really, really well. And the more you know that sort of thing, the more you want to share it in a review. And I absolutely can't do that. I absolutely can't. There isn't room for me to do that. In order to be fair to the authors, there's no room for me to do that. Michael Blanding took a long time to work out his theory of how we got the plays of Shakespeare. I want to give that all the room that it deserves. But if I give it the whole 800 words, a lot of my readers won't have any idea what I'm talking about. A lot of them will be, most people are in the position in their day-to-day walking around life of not even knowing that there is any controversy about who wrote the plays of Shakespeare. So I have to introduce them to that and the outlines of it and the history of it. And it'll be fun. I'm shaking my head, but this is why I do it, because it's so much fun.
Well, yeah, you get, like I said earlier, you got to love what you do. And if you love to read, you love to write. You're in a good position to do that.
The Roth biography will be different. It'll be different from that because it takes one line to summarize who Philip Roth was. Famous late 20th century author, won almost every literary award in the world. There, you're done. The main challenge of that review is going to be allowing the reader to come to an opinion about Roth that is not mine. It's not my place in a review to win over converts or to knock the biographer's obvious love of Roth. It's not my place in a review to do either one of those things. That's going to be trickier to do, much trickier to do, because I've been railing against Roth for 50 years. And I've been doing it always in public. So it's not going to take, it wouldn't take much on somebody's part to find out what I think about Philip Roth's novels. And yet here I am reviewing a biography. So I got to be fair. I got to be fair, not only to the biography, but to Roth. And, quite apart from anything else, I have to be fair to both those things in my review for my own sake. Because if I go on a hobby horse on a subject that is so tempting me to do it, I'll lose credibility with my readers. And that's the coin of the realm. That's what I need to keep going. So if they see that I failed that challenge, then why would they read me again? My animus against Philip Roth is the one predisposition they know about. But if they see that I give into it in one review, the next review, they're going to think, well, maybe he has a predisposition here that I don't know about. I'm still not going to read him. I can't trust him anymore. So I have to be fair. I have to be fair to the subject.
We're probably just about to hit the Zoom time limit. Do you want to kind of tell people where they can find your stuff?
Oh, no. Oh, that's right. There's a Zoom time limit. No, it's not made for windbags like me now, is it? Well,
darn Zoom.
My BookTube channel has my name. All of my reviews have my name. Unlike most denizens of the 21st century, I don't really urge people to find me. I'm not looking for clicks or audiences or anything else. I have lively book conversations on my BookTube channel every single cotton picking day. So if you're looking at this and you're looking at this background and you're liking what you hear, well, there's plenty more of that came from. Plenty more. I'm closing in on video number 4,000. That's a lot. That's a lot of viewing.
Yeah.
And my reviews are easily findable. Just type my name and then the name of whatever book you're wondering about. If it's a book from the last 20 years, chances are I've written about it.
Yeah, I think there's only been one every time I go back and look for a classic book review, I almost always find one in your Penguin series. I think the only one I haven't found was Parzival, and that was it. Every single other one I've looked up, your name popped up. So,
well, that wasn't the intent, but that's a lot of fun. That was a fun byproduct. And I'm now doing a tour of all of my books.
Yeah,
one book a day. So who knows what will happen there? Who knows how long that playlist will be?
Oh my goodness. But yeah, definitely go check them out. And I appreciate being able to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure.
Sure. Have a good day.
You too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel. Artwork by Crystal Cowley. And original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.